I was about to say, I think Alessandro's ready to start. Okay, okay, Alessandro, we'll get this taken. Please. Hey, I'm Josh with marketing here at EPLAN USA. This is Open Line Friday. Want to let you know that this is being recorded. Our Open Line Friday web series has kind of evolved from whenever we first started, where we would like you to get to learn more about us that work with EPLAN, because there's so many great people that work with EPLAN that I thought that having good personalities like Alessandro, who was on 2 weeks ago, Sean, who's been on with me before, they lend so much to the conversation, and they're open to answering questions, which is awesome. And you'll have a chance to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. It's very easy. You just on the side of your name, you can raise your hand, or if you want to leave a question in the chat, you can do that too. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelist today, Sean Mulheron. I think that we all know him because I put this morning on LinkedIn that the man, the myth, the legend, Sean Mulheron. I mean, have you done everything at EPLAN? Probably so.
I had to begin with, because I started as an apprentice, and the apprenticeship that I went through had to take me through every division or every department in EPLAN. So I went into I went into account management, I went into order processing, into finance, into sales, because it's kind of a discovery tour of the company, and you kind of learn the business at the same time. So based on that, yes, I did go through every single department at EPLAN, but eventually focused on the technical side, which I really like and enjoy. And yeah, since 2013, moved into product management, and still in product management, but now in the International Solutions Architect division, which looks after all of the international requirements for the software.
And how long have you been with the company?
Started in 1993, September 1993. That's when I started my apprenticeship. So
just a little bit longer than myself.
28, 29 years, yeah.
And
Alessandro, it's been a lot of fun.
Alessandro Biondi, who I spent a lot of time with here in Houston. Sean, you're in Michigan, right?
Detroit, Michigan, yes.
Okay, and Alessandro's here in Houston. Alessandro, tell us a little bit about what you do.
I'm Alessandro Biondi. I'm the regional sales director here in the South and for the Pacific teams. I've been with EPLAN. I think I just had my third year anniversary. So they still want to keep me, so that's good. The topic of today is obviously close to my heart, but also close to a lot of where I live, process industry. And there's a lot of applications and a lot of benefits that we can provide our customer base here. And I work with Sean a lot on some of these kind of process industry topics. So happy to be here and be a part of the conversation.
It's funny because this topic came up organically last night. Alessandro and I were at a networking event, and Dylan over at Emerson, he said, so there's P&ID, and we're like, whoa, you mentioned something that we're doing tomorrow. You have to check out the webcast. So I'll send you the link. So we went to a great networking event last night. Got to hang out with Emerson and Rawson, and even Nikki, one of the automation ladies. If you haven't had a chance to see what the automation ladies are about, then I'd say go to LinkedIn first, follow EPLAN if you haven't already, and then go and see what the automation ladies are doing, because they are great influencers in the industry, and we had a great time with them. Alessandro can't golf. We found that out. I have his swing. I did a video of it, Sean. So if we want to see his swing, I can maybe post that video while we're talking. Alessandro, you want me to do that?
I mean, if you serve to embarrass me, then
I won't do that. I won't do that.
Was it Jason Fury like, or who was the golfer that had this weird swing? We'd kind of go up and down. It was like, but he had a unique swing, which worked for him. So
I don't know. I think that's Charles Barkley.
Yeah, probably as well.
Wait,
yeah.
I think it was Jimenez, no? Il Meccanico.
No, I don't think it was him. It was not no, can't remember.
Trivia for the people in the chat, if you find out who's You'll get an EPLAN pen sent to you.
We actually have a great video on our YouTube page that I'll put in the chat in a little while about P&ID that Sean did a little while back. But this is a topic that we've been talking about for a little while. And Sean, of course, an expert on many things, and this being one of them. So let's kind of get into P&ID. It's not just a bunch of letters. What does that stand for in the first place?
So P&ID has two different interpretations if we look at the market. People consider it as process and instrumentation diagrams or piping and instrumentation diagrams. And the difference is the amount of information that you put on that particular drawing. So it's a drawing that represents the process of a particular product. So let's say you want to make mayonnaise. So to make mayonnaise, you need the raw ingredients. You need oil, you need mustard, you need salt, pepper, you need various different eggs, and then you have to combine them with specific volumes and ingredients. And all of that process to, at the end, make mayonnaise is represented on a P&ID. And the P&ID captures all of the equipment, all of the instrumentation, and depending on the detail of the drawing, whether you also identify all the piping information associated to those process sections, then you call it a piping and instrumentation diagram. Or if you leave the piping out, then you call it a process and instrumentation diagram. So it's really depends on the information that you display.
And you mentioned one of the industries being food and beverage. Whenever you talk about making mayo, what are the industries that this touches on? And we'll talk about the one that Alessandro is most familiar with last.
Well, typically when you produce any type of product that has to do with liquids, gases, or even, I mean, sometimes solids, you need to manage the flow of these gases, liquids, and solids to be able to produce the end product. And the management and the automation of that product creation is part of the process industrial aspect. So food and beverage, pharmaceutical, oil and gas, water, wastewater, mining, agriculture. You've got many, many different aspects that are involved in process engineering. So it's a really cool aspect because many different products that you touch on a day-to-day basis are created through process engineering, and somehow you have a P&ID that manages all of that.
And Alessandro, you're most familiar with the oil and gas industry, being right here in Houston. So tell us about your experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, in process engineering, especially in oil and gas, you know, the piping and instrumentation diagram and process flow diagram are kind of the heart of, you know, a lot of the projects and the designs and layouts, because there's many different steps in hydrocarbon, you know, manufacturing or you know, kind of getting from the crude to all the different derivatives comes out of a hydrocarbon. There's many different things, right? A lot of our customers, you know, we're talking about a controls panel, so all the elements in that. This is even more, you know, large and has a lot of information, and to design it adequately, efficiently, you need to have a real robust P&ID workflow.
Gotcha. So you guys have worked on projects together, right?
Yes, we have.
And those, tell us, Sean, I'm going to ask you a question about Alessandro. What does he like to work with? Because I know what it's like on my end. Is it more pleasant whenever it's you working with Alessandro than it is for me?
I enjoy Alessandro very much, specifically the fact that, again, he grew up all over the world. So talking about his different traveling, and he speaks Italian, so I try to test my Italian on him, my broken Italian, and enjoy doing that a lot. And on top of that, I'll do a bit of advertising for your sister's restaurant in Houston, which is absolutely delicious, and enjoyed taking me there. So I can only talk highly about Alessandro. He's a lot of fun to be around, and he's got a lot of background information, a lot of knowledge. So it's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Except for the golf, I haven't tested his golf yet, so you'll have to.
yeah, Yeah, maybe you can help him with the swing. I don't know. But we actually brought that up a lot last night, where Alessandro is a man of many things, grown up all over the world, and then talking about his sister's restaurant, which is also very good. But what a lot of people don't know, Sean, is I was having a conversation last night with someone about wine, and I don't know. I'm not the wine guy. I know beer. I don't know wine at all. And so I had to bring our level one sommelier in, which is Alessandro, in case you didn't know. So he came in and he was spitting knowledge like you wouldn't believe, because he knows a lot more about all of that than any of us, because we haven't had that formal training. So it's good. He's being that he is the international man of mystery, he can take in a lot of different directions. But as far as the P&ID is concerned, this is a very important process, isn't it?
The creation of the P&ID, as Alessandro mentioned, is really the heart of the product creation, because at the end of the day, you have, let's again, to come back to mayo, you have to produce the mayonnaise, and the mayonnaise is the product that you will be selling. And the whole creation of that product, you have to manage the ingredients. You have different types of ingredients. Not every ingredient can be stored in the same environment. As I said, if you store your eggs in a hot container or in a hot tank, then you'll have omelet instead of mayonnaise. So you have to make sure you manage the temperature in that tank. You have to manage the type of material that you use in the pipes to transfer that product from one area to the other. So sometimes it's stainless steel, typically in the food and beverage industry, but oil and gas, you might have different requirements based on the acidic environment. So it's incredibly detailed, and there are lots of factors that can ruin the product. I mean, whether it's temperature, pressure, flow, type of material, the speed, the mixing speed. I mean, it's really detailed, and it's pretty fascinating because there are so many different processes, and a lot of times you'll have even chemists involved, and the chemists will go down, to the molecular reaction to make sure that the process works. But at the end of the day, you don't want to make a glass of mayonnaise. You want to make batches, huge batches, to be able to sell them worldwide. And that's where this whole design and automation aspect comes into play. So it's really fascinating how they put all that together, how many teams are involved, and how much data is created.
Yeah, how do you control the checks and balances of it, though? If you're talking to me that doesn't have any experience with it, and you're trying to relay that information, what is the control mechanism behind it?
Well, you have to, again, the P&ID is the heart of the control process. And you have to not only have the visual on the P&ID, but you also have to manage the data. And I think that is one of the challenges that companies have today, is creating the drawings, but also handling the data. And the tools that they use are many different tools, and keeping all of that data synchronized, not duplicating the data. Make sure you have kind of one source of truth that you can access to visualize that information is critically important. And you take, for example, just a tank, and you fill it up. You need a level sensor. You need to make sure that tank doesn't overflow. Well, what does the level sensor look like? You have so many different types of level sensors. And then if you have a level sensor with a probe, how long is the probe? What kind of material is the probe? How often does it have to sense the level or sense the pressure in the tank? And many different ways of measuring that level, whether you measure it according to pressure, whether you measure it according to the actual physical level with a switch or things like that. So it's really it's an interesting environment, but it requires tools to be able to manage all of the data associated to one single object. And that's a lot of time the challenge is to making sure you have an area where you can store it, and also where you can share it and have other people view it, and everybody looks at the same set of data.
So Sean, one of the things that we see is that a lot of these designs are done in a discipline like the mechanical, or typically in a graphical representation of the piping size, and that's a lot of information. But we always see a gap in there, and that's where when the I&D come in, right? The instrumentation electrical part of the P&ID. Because a lot of times when we're talking to our customers, they're kind of looking at, okay, you do P&ID, but we have the software that does a mechanical model, right? The 3D, virtual, digital twin of that plant or that process flow, but they're always missing that I&D. What's been your experience, and how do you address those challenges?
Well, today, if you look at the market, many companies already have tools in place. I mean, whether they use sophisticated tools for P&IDs, like Aviva or Intergraph or others that manage the P&ID, they already have their process in place and manage the data. However, the challenge is bringing that data to the E&IC, as you mentioned, the electrical and instrumentation controls, and to be able to transfer the information to design all of your loop diagrams, all of your power distribution, laying out all the control cabinets, making sure you have the right amount, making sure the cabling is done properly. All of that is a huge aspect of the process automation side. So one aspect is making sure the process is correct, but the second aspect is making sure you manage that process and you have all the controls in place to manage it. So if you have one P&ID, that single P&ID could feed thousands of loops. Now, thousands of loops, you're talking maybe thousands of pages, with each page having one instrument and maybe one actuator, and having an input and an output, having 10 terminals on it. So you multiply that, and it's really, at the end of the day, it's a huge amount of data for controls engineering. And I think that's where I see the gap most often, is the transition from that mechanical aspect, from that process design, into the electrical, and being able to share that data and making sure you have wired all of your temperature sensors and you're not missing like 10 or 20, making sure you're controlling all of the valves and you're not missing out on 2 or 3, and making sure the pumps have the adequate size and they have the adequate power supply. You have the right motor control centers and all of that. And all of those topics are part of the E&IC, which is the electrical and instrumentation control.
And that's typically when I go out to the field and we're talking, out to a drilling rig, right? And then they're connected to a compression station, and we're kind of traveling and it's kind of seeing all the connections. A lot of the issues that we see and is communicated by the I&D and C guys that are out there and doing the maintenance activities. There's also the lack of the information of where everything is connected. They can follow the mechanical design of where the pipes are going, but in those pipes you've got the valves, you've got the instrumentations, you've got calibration sheets, right? And sometimes they have to go and calibrate these instruments, and they struggle with getting that information because again they have a lot of the layout, but they don't have that detailed electrical and instrumentation information to be able readily available, and also where all of that is connecting. And because they're going in and calibrating, right? If you're out, weather, different elements can kind of knock an instrumentation off their calibration. So these are activities they have to do, but again, this is where we see sometimes this is our kind of niche, if you will, within the process industry, because it's kind of underserved with some of the tools that are out there.
Yeah, and I often see as well, just a pure graphical layout, which is more of a mechanical layout of the P&ID. And then in conjunction with that, you have an Excel sheet which captures all of the instruments, all of the pumps, all of the valves. But then there's no linkage between the two. So if ever you modify the mechanical drawing and you forget to update your Excel sheet, suddenly you're missing an instrument, you're missing a pump, you're missing a valve, and that creates challenges in production, makes delay in creating that plant or creating those systems. And I think that's where I see the biggest gap in the industry currently.
If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can leave them in the chat for Sean and Alessandro. If it's a question that doesn't have to do with P&ID, I guess for me, I'll answer something about golf. Because dude, I'm telling you, last night I gave golf lessons, Sean. We had somebody from Lyondale that I gave golf lessons to.
Oh, that's good.
And his swing was a whole lot better when we were done.
That's impressive.
I'm just as surprised as you are, Sean. Just watching him pelt these balls. Wow. We had a bit of a competition. There was one field that you try to get into the rings, right? It's centric circles, right? And obviously more points in, and it was the farthest away. I was like, little gentleman's bet to Josh was, okay, if you can get it in. I started getting worried because he was getting them really.
You're gonna lose some money there.
You didn't want to pay.
But golf is one of those games that's quite interesting because you can swing and botch 20 shots. And then suddenly you have this one swing that hits the ball perfectly and that ball just flies and just goes. And then now you're like, I can do it. And then you hit another 20 to 30 shots that you botched, but you're like, I can do that one shot. I got to do it again. And it just kind of keeps you motivated to continue.
You live for that one shot.
That's
you
right.
Live for
That's
that
right.
one thing because
Yeah.
you will spend thousands of dollars going to play over and over, or getting new clubs, or lessons, or going to the driving range for that one shot.
Yeah.
It may be the most elusive game out there.
And
I have to
even
say.
the other aspect is you watch the PGA, you know, on a Sunday, and then you see this professional guy that just slices it and goes in the ditch, and I'm like, I can do that on a more consistent basis than he does.
Whenever I see Phil Mickelson hit the clubhouse or a window or a barn that's out it's out of bounds, and then he comes back and he wins the championship,
Yeah.
I think that could be me one day.
That's
I
right.
could really do this because the errant shot that he hit, I do those all day.
Yeah.
I just need to figure out how to straighten it out a little bit, and I'll be Phil Mickelson. Maybe not. So what are some of the challenges? Let me ask you this before you tell me about the challenges, Sean. I don't know if you have any examples, but have you ever seen an example of a process that had gone wrong in kind of a funny way, where it produced something that was not even close? Because not a client or anything, but any examples in the field over the years that you've been with us?
Not necessarily. I mean, when we go and visit customers, they don't necessarily show us what went wrong. They show us the good things. So they pretty much show us the end results. But
I'm thinking
getting there, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, again, if you just look at managing, you know, process, managing high pressure systems, managing high velocity flows, all of those things, you can just imagine if somebody sizes the valve wrong or doesn't give you the right type of material for the pipe, or even has a sensor that's defective, and suddenly, you know, you have a lot more product in this tank than should be. I mean, you can imagine the type of situations that can occur by making mistakes. I mean, oil and gas. I mean, you have, what is it? Is it OSHA, that whole regulation that tries to prevent? I mean, you have to describe everything down to a T to make sure that safety protocols are followed, to make sure that you are dimensioning, all of your calculations are right. Because yeah, you make one mistake and it can have catastrophic consequences. I mean, whether you've seen on YouTube those plants just blow up, and all of those are just because you might have an instrument that was faulty. It could have been, you know, as simple as a temperature sensor that's not working right. Or if you wire that sensor wrong, then it gives you the wrong readout. And suddenly, instead of being at 20 Celsius, it's at 25 Celsius. And that creates a whole bunch of issues. So the environment in which people are working, it really is a critical environment. And you have to make sure that the information, that the engineering is really correct, that you cross your I's or you cross your T's and dot your I's, and everything is down. And to do that, you really have to have the right tools to be able to capture the data, to make sure that the data is not duplicated, is not old, is the right one. And I think that's highly critical. Yes.
Yeah,
I was just thinking of. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alessandro.
Yeah, sorry, Josh. Yeah, no, just to follow up on that as well. You know, mechanically, physically, for the most part, plants kind of stay the same, right? I mean, the pipe, you know, they're in the same location, but what changes is obviously the instruments, the valves, something breaks, right? These things, the connections, the wire connections. You know, rats out in the fields, right? I mean, you know, animals out in the field, and so they have to go and replace that. What happens is, again, one of the biggest causes of you know, downtime or prolonged downtime due to unplanned maintenance activities is that lack of information, right? And because the way that they update and the tools that they use to also maintain the you know, as built or as is documentation is cumbersome. And you know, with platforms like EPLAN, that, you know, our database driven approach, once you make that change, you're able to kind of propagate those changes throughout. So it's a lot easier to maintain, you know, the level and quality of data, so that, you know, they always know, for the most part, what's, you know, what's changed, so that they're not trying to guess. It's like, hey, this instrument was something else before, because, you know, people go on rotation to different plants, so they may not, you know, have time to update that, or it's too, again, it's too cumbersome. That's always been one of the things that I always out here in the plants is before the documentation is updated, when they are updated, it takes weeks, and sometimes even months. And then in that time, they've potentially had another issue, so they're always trying to catch up. And this was actually, went to see a dairy plant up in Minnesota. And that was one of the challenges that I heard from there. It was like, you know, they had some downtime. It took them 2 weeks to figure out what the documentation was, to go find the specs. And then I said, so, okay, you fixed that, but, you know, where did you make that change? Oh, we still haven't made the change. When was that change made? A month ago. And, you know, those are kind of a lot of the issues that we see as well. And because, again, that instrumentation and electrical controls part of the process engineering and design is sometimes it's overlooked.
And you make a good point there with finding the information. I mean, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean, when he pulls out his map and he rolls it out on the table and tries to figure out, that is a process engineer at the plant. He pulls out one of these tubes out of the shelf and he rolls out the P&ID and he starts to look at it and figuring out. I mean, it's still, a lot of them are still paper and just analog data. And it's really trying to get those up to speed and updated, and making sure that that plan still continues to work in a safe environment. So it's pretty interesting.
Would you say that that's one of the bigger challenges?
I would say so, yes. I mean, now a lot of the new plants, if you look at the green fields which are built, they're starting to work with more and more data-driven tools, which kind of help a little bit. But if you look at brownfields, I say a lot of the brownfields are still with those paper rolled out P&IDs and need to be updated and maintained.
Can you explain that for me? You say brown and green.
Brownfield and greenfield. Well, let's say you have you want to produce some mayonnaise. Well, if you have not produced mayonnaise before, you need to start and figure out where you're going to build, where you're going to produce that mayonnaise, on which field. So you're going to build a factory. So you really start from scratch. You start with the foundations of the factory. You build everything from the ground up. That means there's nothing there, and you build your processing plant. That's called greenfield. Brownfield is you already have a plant that's producing ketchup. Now you want to convert that plant or modify that plant to now produce mayonnaise on top of it. So then you're going to expand that plant, you're going to enhance it. So you already have a set of drawings for the existing plant, and now you want to add on to it, or you want to expand it, or you want to modify it. That's called brownfield.
Yeah. So existing versus brand new, right? So it's like updating for new builds.
Yeah.
Something you have a lot of experience in, and I would say not only experience, but passion, would be pre-planning. That's kind of your baby. Every time, I don't know if there's a conversation that we've ever had where it did not come up. So tell us about the pre-planning aspect whenever it comes.
So pre-planning is a tool or solution inside of EPLAN, of the EPLAN platform, and it works together with EPLAN Electric P8, with ProPanel, it works with EPLAN Fluid. But what pre-planning does, it allows you to capture information a lot earlier in the design process. If we look at EPLAN Electric P8, we're already talking about detail engineering. Detail engineering is we're looking at putting components in the control cabinet. We're looking at wiring them together. We need to know the connection points, the wires, and so everything is already pretty much in the detailed environment. But how do you get there? How do you get to know what components you need in a control panel? Well, if you go upstream in the engineering process, it starts up with, I need 4 motors. Well, those 4 motors, you need to size them. You need to define how big are each motors. And then from there, you kind of drill down and you add more and more details. So if you go upstream in the engineering process, you need to capture data already early on in the engineering process. And that's typically called the basic engineering phase, where this is where you would create your PFDs, your process flow diagrams, your P&IDs, your process and instrumentation diagrams, and also your single line drawings. So defining power distribution and such. So pre-planning is really in that environment where you can capture the information upfront early on. And it provides you with the way to import data, to create data in a very structured way. If you look at tools to create structures, you'll think of XMind or MindMap, you know, how you can kind of create those structures. Well, one aspect is missing is the graphical aspect. What does the graphical look like? Well, in pre-planning, we kind of tie the two together. We have a structure with XMind-like where you can create levels, you can create sub-levels, you can associate objects, and then you can detail those objects. And additionally, you can also have in parallel a layout. You can have a P&ID, you can have a machine layout, you can have a building layout, and you can overlay all of those logical objects onto those drawings. So you can have a physical view of it, but you can also have a logical view of it. And the huge benefit of pre-planning is once you've created this data in pre-planning, you can leverage that information to auto-generate or to facilitate the generation of everything electrical, whether it's your power distribution, your loop diagrams, your panel layout, and such. So the pre-planning tool is really cool because it's very flexible. I typically go to a customer and I'll look at what he has in Excel because they have instrumentation lists, they have pump lists, they have valve lists, and I will map that Excel file into pre-planning, click on a button, and I import all of their data within one swoop in pre-planning. So now I have that data in the platform, and now I can map that data to circuit diagrams, to cabinets, to anything I want, and then leverage that data to quickly create my circuit diagrams and all my E&IC. So it's a really, really cool tool, and it's underrated, I think, and it's kind of like a diamond in the rough where people are like, this thing can do a lot, but it can do so much that I'm not sure where to start. But it really is pretty straightforward once you get to know the tool. So it's really cool.
And do you think that this is where the quoting tool helps too, right?
You can use pre-planning as a quoting tool as well. If you want to, for example, use a PFD, a process flow diagram, and behind the PFD objects, whether it's a tank, whether it's a pump, whether it's a pipeline, you can store a lot of costs data. So how much does it cost? How much time does it take for me to design it, to lay it out? And that data, once you've captured it, you can just generate a report in pre-planning that tells you your entire system is going to cost you X. So that can be used as a quoting tool as well. And even if you have a manufacturing facility, you just place all of your manufacturing cells. Behind each cell, you have a price, you have a time, you have a building time, a design time, and then you can sum all of those values up to quickly create a quote within that design environment. So it's pretty neat in that perspective as well.
What about what role does ProPanel play in that to go along with the pre-planning phase?
So ProPanel is specifically to design the control cabinet. So in the manufacturing environment, you'll talk about control cabinet, power distribution panels. But now if we look at the process industry and the process environment, we're talking about marshalling panels. We're talking about DCS cabinets. We're talking about field junction boxes. And all of those are control panels that need to be designed. One of the aspects I've always seen in process industry that is a bit different to discrete engineering or discrete manufacturing is the fact that when you have a control panel, you don't just build it on one single surface. So you typically have your panel, you have your backplate, and people lay things out on the backplate. Well, in the process industry, they'll take that backplate and move it towards the middle of the control cabinet. So now suddenly you put a door in the front, a door in the back, and now you have two surfaces that you can mount components on. And now you have different axes. So I think ProPanel becomes even more valuable in the process engineering world because now you really have to visualize the 3D perspective of that panel, of that marshalling panel, of that DCS cabinet to make sure that the components fit on one side of the panel, but also fit on the back of the panel. and then you're able to close the doors on both sides, and you have enough space for your cables to come in. Because we're talking, if we talk about process engineering plants, we talk about thousands and thousands of signals coming into that cabinet. That could potentially be thousands of cables. So all of these cables coming into the control cabinets or marshalling panels and being distributed is quite intense to manage. And ProPanel actually fits perfectly in that space, where you can lay out your marshalling panels really easily. You can build on the front, on the back, on the door. You can rotate, you can visualize that cabinet before you even build it, make sure everything fits.
So Sean, in fact, from I like how you explain that. So if I'm a maintenance engineer, or I've been told that something has changed, right? I've changed a component that has an impact throughout the whole, say, platform within, I've changed something on a panel that there's an actuating, a valve or something. How does that workflow propagate within pre-planning and the different kind of tool sets that we offer?
So if let's say you need to change a valve or you need to remove a valve, and you've already laid it out in EPLAN. So what happens is you go back to the source, you go back to your pre-planning, and you identify that valve. And within pre-planning, you can make changes. So you modify the name of the valve or maybe the size of the valve. And once you've done that, that information is automatically transferred to the object in the platform. And then if you open up, for example, your loop diagram, then suddenly the tag has changed. Now you see the new name of the valve. And if the information of that new valve that you entered doesn't match the information that's on the electrical side, then what happens is you'll see a discrepancy. You'll see the objects not matching anymore, and it can actually flag it. So EPLAN has a mechanism to track changes and also to track errors. So you can run a error check on your entire project and make sure everything is validated. And also, from a change management perspective, you can also let EPLAN know, tell me what has changed between revision A and revision B, and the system can flag all of that in a list and show you exactly what's been modified and where it's been modified. So really, when you make a change in EPLAN, you're making the change throughout the disciplines. And it's not just, I'm making a change here and I forgot to do it there. If you make it there, it's going to be propagated through the software as well. So it's really useful.
Yeah, Alessandro, I think that you brought that up last night, didn't you? Do you remember that conversation that we had talking about, you talked about just this. I believe that we had somebody that was a maintenance engineer out there that we had a conversation with. And it was just that, talking about being able to whenever you have that door that it opens up and then it opens up right into a wall. And it's like, wait, we're not able to do this. This is something that should have been taken into account ahead of time. We actually got a lesson in a few different areas last night with someone talking about the electromagnetic. I don't know. Alessandro, listen, Sean, I was so impressed. Alessandro was talking about.
He always underestimates me.
I do. He was having a conversation about things like the thermogenetic engine. I don't know, dynamic. I don't know what it was, but he held a conversation. He held his own. And then whenever he walked back to me, I said, "What were you talking about?" He's like, "I don't know, man." But he sounded like he knew what he was saying.
No, it was great. It was a great conversation with Nikki, and in her past kind of experiences with electromagnetic field simulation, and a lot of the, we're doing some activities with Emulate 3D that's doing also virtual commissioning, and some of this stuff will be absolutely applicable in certain areas, but yeah, no, it was a great conversation. It's funny how sometimes you don't think you remember pieces of information and topics that you're reading a book or something, and then it all comes up because somebody has triggered that that part. And so but anyway, it was a lot of me asking a lot of questions for what it was that she was specifically doing and the applications, because in the end, technology, I nerd out when it comes to niche technologies that you don't see every day, or it's always hidden, but you don't know where some you see the end results, but you never ever think, stop, let's peel back the curtain, and how is this made? It's like, making mayonnaise, right? A lot of people don't know what's in ingredients. You said a weird ingredient, mustard. I've never seen mustard in mayonnaise, but hey, there may be a variation.
Absolutely,
But
that's the secret ingredient.
that is
Oh,
that's how
really?
my grandmother used to make
Oh.
it. But yeah, again, it's the same thing with the mayonnaise plant or an oil and gas plant. It's there's so much of these technologies behind the scenes that people just don't know. They're not exposed to, right? They eat the sausage, but they don't know how the sausage is made. Maybe that's a bad example, but it's powerful, and this is one of the joys, especially in the kind of industries that pre-planning is applicable. I know that there's some of my favorite because a lot of it is just so impactful. I mean, there's one company out in Louisiana. They were very heavily involved in the COVID vaccination production, and they were they were using EPLAN and pre-planning to map out the system, how it's all going to be connected, and for things like that, it's kind of awesome to have a little bit of part of it, right? We could make those things happen. The gas that goes in your car, things like that. So the cheese that we eat, right? The dairy that we drink, the mayonnaise that we eat.
It's all process engineering, yeah.
So
Josh, to go back to your question in regards to safety and have bad things happened, the show Mythbusters, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that show, but did you ever see the episode where they try and test what happens when a pressure sensor fails on a water boiler?
No.
It's you should look it up on YouTube. And what they do is, in your house, you've got your water boiler or your water tank, and it's very regulated. And they said, what happens if that pressure sensor fails? And of course, it has a redundant pressure sensor, so the chances of it failing in your house are pretty minimal. However, they said, what happens if it does? And they kept on adding pressure to that tank to the point where it literally exploded, and not just exploded, it shot through. They did it on an airport, I think, out on a landing strip, and that thing just flew. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of yards, and it's just quite impressive. Like, when something happens in the process industry, it can be pretty catastrophic.
I love that show. I
Yeah.
love that. Like, even now, going back and watching some of the episodes, I remember whenever, how we all have there's the myth of whenever if somebody in a movie would shoot a car's fuel tank,
Yeah,
like,
and
and
it
actually hit
explodes.
the tank with a bullet, it doesn't blow up.
Yeah,
That's not what happens in real life. If you shoot there, it will never, well, I won't say it will never blow up. It will never blow up to the effect that we see in the movies.
absolutely. They have
And
to
they also
dramatize it.
tested, so the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan,
Hmm.
whenever you have the bullets like going 3-4 feet deep in the water. Well, when a bullet is shot in the water, it honestly can only go about 5 to 6 inches, maybe.
Yeah.
And at that point, it won't. It's not lethal, because that water, the force of it hitting the water, it won't. I mean, it might hurt you, but not the way you see in that opening scene. And the other one
Talking about the bullets in the water, I've got a funny story. I grew up in France in the Basque Country, and my godfather and we used to go hunting and fishing. And you've got the hunting season and you got the fishing season. And it's crazy how animals know exactly when seasons start and when seasons stop. So we're in the fishing season, and we go out to the rivers, and you don't see a single trout, a single salmon, nothing. I mean, you have to spend hours just to get something. And then suddenly you go hunting in the hunting season, you go across a river, and all these trouts are just laying there in the sun and sunbathing. And my godfather got so pissed once, he just took his gun and started shooting the water, trying to get some trout. Oh, I was laughing so hard. He was furious. Like, where are you when it's the fishing season? It was quite funny.
But you can. What's crazy is that you can go bow fishing. No, bow fishing is effective, but shooting a gun in the water is not going to be effective.
No, it's not, and it's not at all. That's right.
my other favorite episode is whenever they tailed an 18-wheeler to see if you really do become more aerodynamic because you're in the flow of the 18-wheeler, and how close, because it conserves your gas if you're close enough. But it's to the point where
less wind resistance. It's physics, right?
Because if you're 5 foot behind it, that's pretty dangerous. And so they were saying that it's very intimidating, although they had a lot of precautions in place. It's so intimidating being that close whenever you're following behind. So they said that you probably don't want to do this like if we're going on I-10, we probably don't want to do that.
No. But that's the whole NASCAR principle, right? That's how the NASCAR cars, because
the drafting,
the drafting, and that's the whole aspect.
Right. There was one question you have. I talked about this at YouTube on P&ID, and you had a question on that, and you probably answered this, but we can talk about it again because I feel like we have to answer this. And the question was, can we design it on normal E-Plan, or do we need only pre-planning?
So if we look at P&IDs, you really need pre-planning, because the way that the objects are defined, the way that you define your instrumentation, and then the way that you create a hierarchy between a process loop and a process loop function and the actual process object, you have to create that hierarchy. And P8 doesn't necessarily, it creates it more at an electrical level and not necessarily at a process level. So if you want to do PIDs or PFDs, then you would need pre-planning to do so. However, when you create the loop diagrams and the single line diagrams and all of the E&IC, the electrical and instrumentation controls, then you would do that in electric P8. And I've seen customers as well take, for example, an AutoCAD P&ID, import it in EPLAN, and have the P&ID in like an overview page, so it's a visual, and then add some invisible objects in that DWG file, so that way you can link to the loop diagrams. So creating a manual link between the objects on a graphical drawing and on the electrical side. So you have different ways of using pre-planning and the platform. And the third option is if you don't have a P&ID, but you have the data in an Excel sheet, you can import it in pre-planning. And even without creating a P&ID, you can leverage that data and simply create your loop diagrams. So there's different approaches depending on how the customer is set up, or how the user is set up, or how he wants to start. But it's so whether you need the platform or not, you'll always need P8 if you want to electrify your system, if you want to do your loop diagrams and your single line. But if you have or you don't have a P&ID, that just depends on where you want to start.
But always remember within EPLAN, for the most part, you're not opening up a new software and having to import export. It's all in the same project. You just need that added functionality unlocked to be able to work in the both disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, it's another Open Line Friday that has come and concluded. So, Sean, hey, thanks for joining us. We always enjoy talking to you. I guess that you and Alessandro, since you work together, you talk a lot more, but we need to get on those weekly calls that we talked about so we can talk about music again. Because
I like that.
I think that everybody in EPLAN has some musical talent except for me. And I find out about these all the time.
I'll join you in that.
So Toto, Africa, that's your song, Alessandro?
That you didn't see that on LinkedIn, that we were, so whenever we did our last Open Line Friday, we talked about the songs that we would sing at karaoke.
Yeah, Earth, Wind and Fire, Boys to Men. Yeah.
But yeah, well, his is Boys to Men, but Bruno actually chimed in this morning and said that Toto's Africa would be the one that would like be a good karaoke song. I don't know if that would be the perfect.
I think that's a tough one to sing. I mean, you really have, it's a very specific note you have to hit there to. Unless you've had a few beers, then anything's possible.
That's exactly right. You don't even care at that point. whenever I was growing up in a small town of Jennings, Louisiana, I had some friends that their dad was a saxophone player, and he was part of this band that traveled around Louisiana, and they were the brass that was backing on Rosanna and that whole album for Toto. So he had a gold and a platinum record on the wall, and I thought, God, that would be so cool to have that, because the lead singer at that time from Toto, he was from Benton, Louisiana, so he knew all the local artists. I thought that'd be like the coolest thing to have, just a record sitting up there. And then I saw a few years later that those records that they send the artist, that they're not even their own records. They just print a record that could be anybody's, or they go get them off the shelf somewhere, and it could be other people's songs on that actual record. It's not their record that they're coloring, painting to be gold or platinum. So it's a lot less cool when you think about it that way.
It's that. So
I know, right?
when you find one in a basement of an antique show somewhere, then you want to sell it, then you try to play it first, and it's definitely not going to be the one that's represented, right?
You know what? Maybe we'll have to try it. I have, I think, 3 gold records at my house that maybe if I had a record player, we could play them. So I have, in fact, I have one for Bonnie Raitt. We'll see if it's actually Bonnie Raitt that's on that record. Maybe we'll do that one day. Don't forget, if you haven't already registered, we have Derek Santa Maria that's going to be helping us out on Tuesday. Back to school with e-learning. So he'll walk through some self-paced modules and create support tickets. So please join us for that. Alessandro, Sean, thanks for hanging out today and doing Open Line Friday.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Always a
Moderating.
pleasure to
Absolutely.
be amongst you gentlemen.